I was standing on my daughter's front step in the November cold, my hand raised to knock, when I heard her voice through the door. I froze. My other hand was pressed flat against my coat pocket. Inside was a folded envelope from a law office in Antigonish, and what was written on the pages inside that envelope was something I still couldn't fully believe. I had driven 11 hours back from Nova Scotia to tell them. 11 hours rehearsing what I would say, how I would say it. I was going to knock on that door and tell my daughter and my son-in-law that everything was going to be all right. But then I heard her voice, and my hand just hung there in the cold air. Before I tell you what I heard and what I did next, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like your own family saw you as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. And subscribe if you want to hear how this old man found his way back. I'd like to know who's out there listening. I think this story might matter to you the way it mattered to me. My name is Alvin. I am 67 years old. I spent 41 years as a shift foreman at a paper mill in Kapuskasing, Northern Ontario. My hands are rough and wide and they ache in the cold in ways they didn't used to. My wife May used to hold them anyway. May, 39 years. She died in February of pneumonia that moved faster than anything I've ever seen move. 4 days from the first cough to the last morning I sat beside her bed holding her hands, trying to understand that the world I had known for almost 4 decades was folding itself up and putting itself away. Our house, the one on Briar Lane in Kapuskasing, with the porch railing I kept meaning to fix, and the garden May replanted every spring without fail, had been in her name. A tax arrangement from when we were young and trusted our accountant's advice without asking many questions. It never mattered for 31 years, then it mattered all at once. My daughter sat me down at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, the one May had picked out at a sale in Sudbury, and explained it to me. The house had passed to her as next of kin. They needed the sale proceeds. She and my son-in-law were under financial pressure, she said. She used words like unfortunate and unavoidable. The way people do when they've already decided something and need you to agree it wasn't their choice. I moved into their guest room in Barrie, 3 boxes from the liquor store, a pull-out futon, a window that faced a cedar fence. My CPP and OAS together came to just under $1,900 a month, which covered my prescriptions, my phone, and a modest contribution toward groceries. I tried to stay small. I washed my own dishes. I kept my things in the boxes because there was nowhere else to put them. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they were good people who were struggling. I was wrong about the second part. 11 weeks after I moved in, a law office in Antigonish called. My father's youngest brother, Norbert, had died. I hadn't spoken to Norbert in 14 years. A falling out over my father's estate that seemed unforgivable at the time, and embarrassing in hindsight. He was a quiet man, never married, no children, lived on Cape Breton Island and described what he did for a living as a small operation. I had assumed he meant a cabin somewhere and maybe a few acres of pasture. The lawyer's name was Morley. He had a steady, deliberate voice and the kind of patience you develop from spending 30 years helping families untangle themselves from each other's messes. He asked me to come to Antigonish in person. I almost didn't go, but May used to say the conversations you avoid are the ones you end up paying for. So I borrowed my neighbor's car. His had a working heater, mine did not, and I drove east. The service was small. A minister who read from Nodes Boots, a handful of neighbors who shook my hand. I was the only family there. Norbert had kept to himself, the way men of that generation often did, the ones who believed that emotion was a private matter. Afterward, Morley led me into a wood-paneled office that smelled of old paper and coffee, and he slid a document across the desk. I read it twice, then a third time. Norbert had left me everything. 312 acres of apple orchards in Prince Edward County. Land he'd purchased decades ago and leased to a craft cider operation called Ridgewood Cider under a commercial agreement that generated approximately $92,000 a year in royalty income, with 6 years remaining on the term. A stone cottage on the Bruce Peninsula, 4 hectares of waterfront on Lake Huron overlooking Georgian Bay, purchased in 1994 for almost nothing and never sold. Registered investments, RRSPs, GICs, a small selection of blue-chip holdings he'd held so long they'd compounded quietly into something substantial. Total approximate value, $840,000. Morley's conservative estimate of the full estate, $2.9 million, Canadian. I sat in that parking lot for 25 minutes before I could drive. I thought about the pull-out futon. I thought about the 3 boxes from the liquor store. I thought about my daughter's careful, flat voice, explaining that the house on Briar Lane had unfortunately passed to her. I wasn't a burden anymore. I could buy my own place, a modest apartment in Barrie or back north, somewhere familiar, a bed that didn't fold in the middle, a kitchen I could use without feeling like I was borrowing something, and I could help them. I knew they were struggling. I heard the whispered arguments through the walls at night, the tense silences at dinner. This money, this impossible gift from a man I hadn't spoken to in 14 years, could fix all of it. It could wipe the slate clean. It could buy my daughter's life back and buy me back into a family. I put the car in drive and started the 11-hour return. The whole way, I rehearsed what I'd say. I'd knock on the door. I'd sit them down at the kitchen table. I'd watch the relief break across my daughter's face. This was the moment everything turned around. I pressed my hand flat against my coat pocket 3-4 times during the drive, just to feel the envelope there, just to remind myself it was real. I pulled onto their street as evening came down. The garage light was on. I parked at the curb and walked up the driveway and raised my hand to knock. And through the door, I heard my daughter's voice. Not her company voice, her real one, the sharp, controlled one I recognized from the time she'd had to call the credit card company. "Harry, I am done going around this. There is a place called Birchwood Gardens out on the Essa Road. It's provincially funded. It's clean. Louise at work went through this with her husband's mother. If you push correctly, they can move the wait list." My son-in-law's voice, lower, drained. "Roxy, he's your father. He is 67 years old and he contributes nothing. CPP and OAS barely cover his medication. He takes up the room we need. His birthday is December 9th. We tell him then. We frame it as what's best for him. He'll know something's wrong. He won't argue. He has nowhere else to go." My hand dropped. Birchwood Gardens. I knew the building. Long, low, out near the big box stores and the strip mall on the edge of town. Small concrete courtyard with plastic chairs. The kind of place you went when your family had run out of other arrangements. They thought I was a 67-year-old man with a government pension and no options. They thought I had nothing. A cold, hard thing settled in my chest underneath the rage, something quieter and more deliberate. I thought about Norbert. Old Norbert, alone on his island, keeping to himself, quietly building something over decades, while everyone assumed he was just a bachelor with a cabin and a few apple trees. He never explained himself. He never complained. He just did what needed doing and let the results speak eventually. I let my shoulders fall. I let the 11 hours of driving and the 8 months of grief and the 39-year loss settle into my face. I let myself look every one of my 67 years, and I knocked. The door opened. My daughter's face went through 3 expressions before landing on warm concern. My son-in-law appeared behind her with his hands deep in his pockets, unable to quite meet my eyes. I shuffled inside. I sat at the kitchen table the way a tired man sits, heavily, carefully. I accepted the tea I hadn't asked for. They waited 7 minutes before my daughter asked about the estate. I looked down at my mug. I clasped my hands and made them look like they were trembling slightly. "There's a bit of a situation," I said. "Norbert had some land, more than I'd realized. But it turns out there are tax arrears. See back assessments, years of them. Morley, the lawyer, says that as sole heir I might be on the hook." I let my voice go thin. He said it could be significant. I don't fully understand all the details. I just know it sounded very bad. The silence that followed had a texture. My daughter sat back in her chair. My son-in-law made a sound in the back of his throat. "How significant?" he asked. "He's going to send paperwork." I rubbed my eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm exhausted. I need to sleep." I shuffled to the back room and closed the door. The trap was set. What followed was instructive. Within 48 hours, the baseboard heater in the guest room stopped producing consistent warmth. When I mentioned it, my son-in-law said he'd look at it when he had a chance. He never had a chance. I began sleeping in my sweater, then my coat. The dinner portions contracted, not dramatically but steadily, the way water recedes before a tide. When I reached for more bread one evening, my daughter smiled and mentioned they were watching their spending, given the uncertainty around the tax situation, as if the uncertainty were something I'd tracked in on my boots. One morning my crossword book was gone from the kitchen counter. My daughter said she hadn't seen it. The next day she mentioned an article she'd read about cognitive routines in men my age. I understood they were building a case. I was the evidence. It was past 1 in the morning, a Wednesday, when I heard them through the wall. My son-in-law's voice was not the careful voice he used in my presence. It was stripped and raw. "It's gone, Roxanne. The whole position. I have been trying to tell you for 3 weeks." "What do you mean, gone?" "The platform froze withdrawals. The entire investment, I don't think it's coming back. I think it's gone." "Perry, that was your entire RRSP, 15 years of contribution room." "I know what it was." A silence, then her voice very quiet. "How much total?" "The portfolio was $212,000, plus the HELOC we took out in March. The house equity. I thought it was going to recover. Every projection." "You used the house." Her voice broke in a specific, final way. "You forged my signature on the HELOC application. I've seen the form. That is not my signature, Perry." I lay perfectly still in the dark. "The bank is going to issue power of sale," she said. 30 days, maybe 40, and my father is sitting in our guest room with CRA debt we were counting on him not having." Her voice stopped. When it came back, it was different, colder, sharper. "We need him assessed before he can sign anything on his own. I know a registered occupational therapist. She can come informally, just to establish on the record that he's been forgetful, disoriented. Then, if we apply for guardianship, we have documentation. We can manage his accounts. We can." I got up. My joints cracked in the cold air. I went to the bathroom at the far end of the hall and I called Morley. It was 1:15 in the morning. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Morley, it's Alvin. I am sorry for the hour. I need help and I need it before they file anything." He listened without interrupting. When I finished, his voice was steady and immediate. "You need to move the assets tonight, in principle, and sign documents as fast as I can draft them. If they obtain interim guardianship before you act, they can freeze your accounts. Everything, including the estate. What you want is an alter ego trust. Your name, your control, no one else's access. To pierce it, they would have to prove you were incompetent at the time of signing, which would be very difficult, given that you sound considerably more lucid than most people I speak with during business hours." "The orchard," I said, "the lease income. Can we keep that generating?" "Absolutely. The lease runs independently. We'll hold the land in the trust. The royalty payments flow directly to you. The investment portfolio, I can have the non-registered accounts liquidated by end of business tomorrow. GICs at maturity, we'll roll those in as they come. The cottage on Lake Huron is unencumbered. We hold that in the trust as well." "And the house," I said. "Their house. Find out who holds the mortgage." A pause. "Both mortgages?" "Both." He said he'd make calls in the morning. I said to make them now. The next day I moved through the house in my coat, squinting at labels, losing track of sentences mid-thought, holding my cup of tea with both hands so it looked like they were unsteady. My daughter had invited her friend, a registered occupational therapist, for what was described to me as a friendly check-in. The woman arrived at 2 in the afternoon with a clipboard in her bag and a practiced warmth in her voice. She sat across from me and asked what day it was. She asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. She asked me to identify who my daughter was. I answered 3 questions vaguely. I cited a prime minister who had been out of office for over 20 years. I stared at the window for a beat too long. My daughter, from the kitchen doorway, caught my son-in-law's eye. I let the silence hold for 5 full seconds. Then I sat up straight. "I think we can stop," I said. The occupational therapist's clipboard went still. "I know exactly what day it is," I said. "I know precisely where I am, and I know why you're here." My daughter stepped into the living room. Her face was moving toward concern. "Dad?" "Birchwood Gardens," I said. She stopped. I was standing on the front step when you said it, the Essa Road. December 9th, Louise from work. I heard every word. My son-in-law by the fireplace put one hand on the mantel. The occupational therapist quietly closed her clipboard and began putting on her coat. You've been building a record, I said. The heater, the portions, the crossword book. Every time you let me shiver in that room, every time you watched me and called it concern, you were building a case. Not because I'm confused, because you needed legal control of my accounts before I could do anything with whatever Norbert left. That is not $212,000, I said. From the RRSP, $60,000 from the home equity line that carries a forged signature, and the bank's power of sale notice, which I understand you told my daughter was junk mail. My son-in-law said nothing. My daughter said nothing. The occupational therapist was gone. I want to tell you something, I said. I've been waiting to tell you something since I got back from Antigonish. My daughter's chin came up, that smallest, most desperate flicker of hope. Norbert didn't leave me tax arrears, I said. I watched her face. He didn't leave me debt. He didn't leave me problems. He left me 312 acres of commercial orchard land under an active lease to Ridgewood Cider. He left me a waterfront cottage on Lake Huron. He left me an investment portfolio worth nearly $1 million. I paused. Morley's conservative estimate of the full estate is $2.9 million. $2.9 million. The words landed like a stone in still water. My daughter's hand went to her mouth. For a moment she was completely still. Then she crossed the room and put her arms around me, and she was shaking. Real tremors, I think, though I was no longer certain what real meant from her. She was crying into my shoulder. Oh, Dad. Oh, God. You were protecting yourself, weren't you? You were testing us. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. We were under so much pressure and we said things. I know we did, but it's going to be okay now. It's all going to be fine. I let her hold on for a moment. Then I put my hands on her shoulders gently and created space between us. There's one more thing, I said. She looked at me. The house. This house. What about it? Morley contacted both lenders yesterday morning, I said. I reached into my coat and brought out a different envelope. Not Norbert's estate documents, but one Morley had couriered to a post office box I'd set up on my way to sign the trust documents. As of 9 o'clock yesterday, my trust purchased the debt, the full amount, the original mortgage, and the home equity line your husband took out in your name. The banks have been paid. They are no longer your creditors. My daughter stared at the envelope. You paid it. You saved the house. I own the debt, I said. I am your creditor now, which means I hold the deed, and you are tenants in default. I set the envelope on the coffee table, the same table where she'd left the Birchwood Gardens brochure 3 days earlier. That is a 60-day notice to vacate. The silence that followed was not angry. It was something quieter than anger. It was the sound of a structure giving way. My daughter sat down on the couch slowly. She looked at the envelope. She looked at me. Something went out of her face that I hoped, when I had more distance from all of this, I would eventually see return in a different form. My son-in-law said something. I don't remember exactly what. And then there were tears, and then there were accusations that dissolved into grief, and I stood in the middle of the living room and waited. I waited for one of them to say something that sounded like accountability rather than calculation. Neither of them quite got there. I picked up my coat from the hook by the door. My 3 liquor store boxes were already in the back of my neighbor's borrowed car. I'd loaded them at 5 that morning before anyone else was awake. Where will you go? My daughter said. Her voice was very small. Lake Huron, I said, Norbert's cottage. I walked out the door. I didn't slam it. I pulled it shut behind me, heard the latch click, and walked down the driveway past the dead November grass and the basketball hoop my son-in-law had installed 2 years ago and used approximately 3 times. I drove west. It took 4 hours. The cottage on the Bruce Peninsula was exactly what the deed described. Stone walls, low ceilings, windows that needed recalking, a wood stove that still drew beautifully once you got a fire going. The cliff dropped away to Georgian Bay 30 meters from the back door. In November the water was gray and enormous, indifferent to everything, which suited me fine. I slept for 12 hours. When I woke up, my breath was fogging in the cold air and the stove had gone out, and I lay there thinking about May, about how she would have found the draft under the back door immediately and would have complained about it once, precisely once, and then would have stuffed a towel against it and moved on. I missed her the way you miss a limb that isn't there, constantly, involuntarily, in the middle of other things. But I was not a burden anymore. I was not the man in the guest room waiting to be filed away. I called Morley. We talked for the better part of an hour. By the end of it, the outline of the May and Norbert Sharp Fund for Elder Dignity had enough shape to begin drafting incorporation documents, a federally registered Canadian charitable foundation, seeded with the annual orchard lease income and a portion of the investment proceeds, dedicated to legal aid and emergency housing support for seniors facing financial exploitation by family members. We would pay for lawyers. We would fight improper guardianship applications before they could move through the courts. We would be the phone call that gets answered at 3 a.m. for every man sitting cold in a back room, listening through a wall. Morley relocated to Owen Sound, close enough to consult regularly. We brought on a woman named Tilda, a former elder law advocate from Hamilton who knew the provincial system in ways that were both impressive and sobering. In the 8 months since, we've helped 19 people across Ontario, stopped 4 guardianship applications, moved 3 seniors out of situations considerably worse than a cold guest room. The Ridgewood cider operation sent their operations manager to meet me in the spring, a young woman who said Norbert had always renewed without argument and never asked for anything beyond what the lease specified. She brought a case of their dry apple cider as a greeting. I told her the terms would stay the same. She seemed relieved. We shook hands in the driveway, and she looked at the view of Georgian Bay the way you look at something that surprises you, even when you were expecting it. I fixed the draft under the back door. I found a good wood stove thermometer at the hardware store in Tobermory. I planted 3 things in the back garden because May would have wanted me to, even though I can't say I know precisely what I'm doing out there. My daughter called in April. She'd found an apartment in Barrie, East End, 2nd floor. She'd also begun seeing a counselor. Not because of what had happened between us, she said, but because she'd started to understand that the way she'd handled things had come from a fear she'd been carrying for years and had never looked at directly. My son-in-law was gone. He was facing a civil proceeding related to the forged HELOC documents. She said she wasn't calling to ask for anything. She just wanted me to know. We were quiet on the phone for a long while. The cottage has a spare room, I said. Nothing fancy. Gets cold when the wind is off the bay. Dad. Not now, I said. I'm not saying now. I'm saying the room is there. When you're ready. If you ever are. She said, okay. The road back from something like this isn't straight. It doesn't move on a schedule. Some mornings I take my coffee out to the cliff edge and watch the light come across Georgian Bay, and I feel nothing complicated. Just an old man, a cup of coffee, a very large lake, and the memory of a good woman who never once flinched at rough hands. Other days the grief and the anger arrive tangled together, and I can't quite sort out where one ends and the other begins. What I know is this. I came back from Nova Scotia ready to give it all away. I came back prepared to hand over everything Norbert had quietly built over a lifetime to a daughter and a son-in-law who were already planning to lock me away. I came back believing that money could purchase a family. It can't. But it can, if you're careful about where you put it. Answer the phone at 3 a.m. for someone who has nothing and no one. It can pay for a lawyer when a person has run out of options. It can be the difference between a door closing and one opening. Norbert understood that. He just never said so out loud. I think I finally know the man. If my story touched something in you tonight, do me a favor and hit that like button. It truly means something to this old man, knowing you're out there. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story I have to tell, and leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, what time it is in your part of the world. I'll be reading every one. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.